Welcome back, everybody. Tonight's treasure story is going to be pretty interesting. This site was actually found by Martin Flagg. He's the signs and symbol expert from season 1 at Lost Gold of World War II on the History Channel. Anyway, Martin's been hunting Spanish treasure signs and symbols and finding little treasures his whole life. He's basically been living off the land, so to speak, in the treasure hunting world for the past 30 years. So let's get right to it. Martin goes out and he's finding these signs and symbols on a mountaintop markers, they're called, as the Spanish would put them in as they came up from Mexico into what is now Arizona and New Mexico areas, heading on to Utah even. They didn't have road maps or signs, so they would carve notches in the tops of these mountains, and this way, from far off distance, you'd know which way to go. You'd know which way it was a safe trail, you'd know which way the Indians were, you'd know which way water was, or safe camp. And all of this is still out there. If you go out there and look, and you'll see in the top of these mountains coming up from Mexico, directions for the Jesuits and or the Spanish to follow back to the mine sites. So Martin's following these signs and symbols into the mountain range, and he's hot on the trail of what he believed to be his Montezuma treasure site. And he follows the signs and symbols in to a point where, he has no choice but to park the truck and walk the rest of the way. And, this is out in the desert, so it's not very hospitable. There's cactus and snakes all over the place. And once he gets out of the truck, he's got literally a 5-mile hike, up some steep stuff, down some skinny steep trails, and back up and down and up and down. He's going from a high elevation, 2,000-3,000 feet, all the way down almost back to sea level as he goes to the basin of the creeks in the bottom of these valleys, and then up over the next top of the hill. And it's a good long hike to the location he's going in, about 12 hours. He finally gets in there, and on his way in, and he's just about to the location, it starts raining. And, unusual in the desert, but it starts raining pretty good. So now he's, from sweating and it being exerted, he's really got the bare minimal with him. Didn't anticipate the rain. He did anticipate staying overnight, but he didn't bring a tent. He just brought a big old tarp with him. Figured he'd roll up in the tarp and get a good night's rest. He had some dried food, and, some matches and water. So he gets up to the location, is pouring buckets, and he finds this huge marker that is like a giant bird per se, like a falcon standing on a branch almost, but it's, in bedrock. It's just the most enormous and beautiful thing you ever did see. And its head is pointing down and looking down into this escarpment of, kind of a 40-degree slope of decomposed granite. And when granite decomposes, it's got these little BBs that it creates. So, it's really slippery, and you got to really pay attention to where you're walking. Martin's pretty beat. He's leaning up against the back of the bird, just kind of taking in the landscape, and it starts raining a little harder and a little harder. Now it's getting to be a downpour, and the water's starting to build up on the rock surface and comes, starting to flow everywhere and kind of go into the little gullies on the rock surface and really start flowing. And he's just trying to tuck up against the rock to stay dry. And he starts hearing this noise that sounds like a waterfall, water dropping off into a big puddle or into a space with a little echo to it. So he decides he's going to follow that noise, and as he follows the little creek and where all the creeks kind of come together, not really creeks, but little runoff on this rock, and it comes in and starts looking like a culvert. Pretty good amount of water's running through it. And he follows that, and it actually goes into a hole in the rock that's about 20 inches round, and it's kind of like a culvert, just disappears off underneath the water. Underneath the ground. And you can hear the noise like the water's falling off with space. So he gets down on his hands and knees, and he stuffs his body in the hole, shines the flashlight down there, and he sees a tractor trailer room full of gold bars lined up across the floor with all kinds of old weapons and tools, swords and shields. And at the one side of this tunnel, he sees these chairs and these kings, and he called them kings, and he said they were probably conquistadors or something. They were in full garb, And he notices that the one closest that he can see has this square, like, alabaster box in between its legs that's on the chair that it's sitting on. It's a stone chair. And there's another king next to him and another king around the corner where he can't see any further. And he's looking at this thing, and it's like 30, 40 foot drop to the floor. He has no way to get down there. And, now he's plugging the hole, so all the water's coming up his backside and kind of going around him, trying to get in the hole. So he backs out of the hole, and he's trying to figure out, like, holy crap, what am I going to do now? So he decides, he's going to have to get out of there and go get a rope or a ladder or something. And now it's pouring pretty good, and he's, at a pretty high elevation. So he starts to make his way down, the hillside, down the rock face, and gets to a point where the wash water coming down the canyon is now starting to pick up, and he can't cross that break anymore. The water's coming through there so fast, and you can actually hear the rocks crunching underneath, and it's ripping up some of the landscape around it, and it's going down in front of him. So he decides to climb up into a little niche on a shelf on the rock, like 4 feet up off the top of this creek, and kind of wait it out. And he gets up there, and he's kind of bundled up with his tarp around him, and it doesn't sound like the most pleasant spot to be. And of course, over the course of the next 2 or 3 hours, the creek comes up high enough, and now it's at the ledge, and washes him out into that running water now. And he gets thrown down the canyon through this wash and this basically brown water rapids for about a mile, and really gets banged up and mangled up at the bottom of this one time the water kind of lets him off, and he recedes out into a little sandbank. And now he's pretty beat up. He's basically thrown his hips out of alignment, and he's hurting. And he lays there for probably 10 hours. And took him another 2, almost 3 days to crawl out to his truck, so he could drive out of there. So, this is all going on, and, now he's seen this fantastic treasure, and he knows that the signs and symbols that he followed were true, and he just can't wait to get back up there. But he's beat up, and he's got to recuperate. He goes to the doctor. He's got dislocated hips. He's got a couple broken toes and a crack in his shin, and he ain't going anywhere anytime soon. So subsequently, he sends a couple of his friends up there, and they follow his directions to a T, but they can't find this hole. And they go back 2 or 3 times, and they still can't find that hole. So, after a while, Martin's sitting on it, and he brings it to me and to the guys that I was working with at the time, and invites us up to, go up to the site and get this job done. So we bring an investor in, and, it's, like I said, a 12-hour hike in there. Certainly a lot easier to go by helicopter. So we make plans to, take all of us, and if we're going by helicopter, now Martin can come in too. So we get Martin and our group together. There's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's about 7 of us all together, maybe 8. 1, 2, 3, 6 guys, sorry. And we rent a helicopter, and, it costs a little bit, but we get all our gear, and we head on up there, in the interim of all this, order some satellite work to be done, and we see that there's some vent holes and some air venting out of certain locations all around this mountainside. Now, mind you, this is in November. This is actually, we land on this location on Thanksgiving Day. And there's about 8 inches of snow at this elevation. It's about 6,800 feet in elevation. It's beautiful landscape, but cold motto. 28 degrees during the day, and about that, and lower at night with a little crisp wind blowing, but beautiful sky. So we all get in there, the helicopter lands, we offload, we're tenting it. I mean, it's cold, I'm freezing. The helicopter can't take everybody in and all the gear at once, so it takes the first 4 guys in, and Martin and I are left at the tarmac with our gear. So those guys get in, and they start setting up camp and tents and all that good stuff. And by the time the helicopter gets back for Martin and I and gets us on board and back to the site, when we get there, they got all the prime locations all set up, a nice wind barrier for themselves, and they had put Martin's tent on a snowbank that had a creek underneath of it. So that wasn't going to work. So, and Martin's tent was a brand new tent, straight from the store, and he never checked the bag. So it also had a little issue. The fly was missing. So he basically had, a tent with screens all the way around, and it's 28 degrees. But thankfully, he had brought a tarp that he was going to put under the tent to begin with, and now it became the fly for the tent. Anyway, so we get all our stuff set up, and we got some dinner, some, mountain house, dried food, plenty of water. We start a nice campfire. It's probably, I don't know, 6, 7 o'clock at night now. It's dark. It's cold, and we're just, blazing a fire, trying to keep warm, and, just talking. The next thing you know, out of nowhere, this bright light that looks like a little tiny fizzy sun comes shooting across the horizon about 2.5 miles out on top of this mountain range. And on the other side of the mountain range, about 60 miles, is the next major city. And you can actually see the glow of that city off in the distance. But where we are is pitch black. We're in the middle of damn nowhere. There's tons of stars out. No moon out that night. And this fizzy orange ball comes shooting across the sky and then goes right across the horizon and then stops there and just hangs there. It's like, from our perspective, it's 2.5 miles out to the top of that mountain. And, that thing is sitting about maybe 800, 1,000 feet above the tree line at the top of that mountain. And we're looking at it, and it's kind of curious. And then it all of a sudden just blinked out. It was there, and it wasn't. And we're looking at each other like, wait a second, did we just see that? And then 2 seconds after that, another one comes from the same. It comes from the south direction, comes right up the ridge, and stops about a half a mile short of where the other one was. And as soon as it gets into position, the one that turned off turns back on. So now the two of them are there sitting on the top of this ridge and literally look like little suns that are kind of fizzing. There's nothing dripping off of them, but they're just like little bright suns, and they're kind of changing their reflections. And we're all staring at it like, wait a second, are we seeing this? Is this like real? And within the next hour, 4 more show up on that ridge line. Now they're all lined up about a half mile apart. There's about 6 of them there. And we're looking at it and we're like, holy crap, it's starting to look like the Phoenix lights on the ridge there. And they just sat there in that position for, God, it had to be an hour or 2. And finally, it's like 2:30 in the morning. We're all staring at this, trying to get pictures of it. I mean, it's got pictures of it, but they're all moving around. But you can see that the stars in the background are totally stationary on the film. And these things are just me leaving light streaks all over the film and the camera. So with that, it's 2:30 in the morning. The other guys went to bed at probably an hour before that, and I'm yawning. I can't stay up and watch these things any longer. I'm freezing to death, and I just need to get in my tent and go to sleep. It's been a long day. Martin's still sitting out there in his chair watching these things. And finally, he said about half an hour after I went to bed, they all lined up against each other, like from our perspective, about 3 inches apart, and then followed the ridge of the mountain all the way to the right side of us, and then darted off over and away from us, down over the top of the next mountain, and disappeared. So, with that, Martin, gathers his stuff and he gets in his tent, and him and I are now separated from the main group because they all have the nice cushy spot with the windbreaks, and I'm on a big rock with a beautiful 180-degree view. A little windy, but it's all right. And Martin's kind of right behind me about 20 feet because he snores loud. So we go to sleep, and, I'm tucked into my mummy bag, and I got a 2-person tent. It's pretty tight in there. I got all my gear in there, and I'm squeezed into my bag and pretty warm overall. And I fall asleep. And then all of a sudden I wake up, and there's this, I thought one of the guys outside was screwing with me. There's like an 8-inch round light circle on my tent, like shining in my face, like the sun was coming up, and it was shining so brightly right through my eyelids that I had to open my eyes. And when I did, I saw this light circle, and then it backed away from my tent, and the whole area around my tent lit up like a Christmas tree, like it was daylight outside. And I'm now squeezed in the bag, still cold, and I don't want to get out, but I'm trying to wiggle my way out of the bag to go get, reach for the zipper in the tent. And I can't get it, out fast enough, and all of a sudden, whoosh, it's pitch black. And now I'm like freeze frame right at the tent door with my hand on the zipper. I'm not most of the way, my top half is out of the sleeping bag, and I'm like, oh, those guys are out screwing with me, but I don't hear a peep out there. And I'm too cold, and I'm figuring, these guys are all armed to the teeth, so if there was anybody walking around our camp, they would have been shot at. So I wasn't really that worried about it. I just figured it was one of them screwing with us, and I went back to bed. Next morning, got up, we were like, I asked Martin first thing, I'm like, yeah, those guys were shining a light on your tent last night? He's like, yeah, and he woke me up, and I was going to go out, and I just said, screw it, and he went back to bed too. We went to those guys. They're like, all right, which one of you wise guys was shining the light on our tent? And he's like, they're looking at us like they don't know what the hell we're talking about. And Martin and I are looking at each other like, I know somebody was screwing around out here last night. And there's no marks or any extra footprints or anything like that around our tents. So, But we're all, sitting around talking about these fizzy lights on the horizon, and Martin says, yeah, he watched them go over the edge, and they certainly looked like what people described as the Phoenix lights. And we still don't know to this day what they were. And with that, we go out hunting for this treasure the next day, and, maybe it's not the best time to go hunting treasure when there's 8 inches of snow on a steep mountainside. And it's icy cold, but we figured, I brought a FLIR camera with me, forward-looking infrared camera, and figured, okay, if there is venting coming out of these cracks from the underground that would be a little warmer, there would be melted snow around those cracks, and or that I would be able to see the difference in the heat, the hotter air coming out or the warmer air coming out of these cracks with the FLIR camera. So we spent the day going around and looking for different cracks and see if there was caves there or anything else, and identifying signatures, and of course the hole that Martin originally found. But when we got to the spot that he said there originally was, it wasn't there. There was a big concrete, like somebody had made literally, and he said it was the Indians, but someone had taken concrete and all that loose material that is the decomposed granite that was on that rock, and mixed it together, and then put a big plug in that hole and kind of shaped it like a mushroom, and it almost blended right into the existing rock. You almost couldn't tell that it didn't belong there, except that I could see the edges where it had kind of mushroom capped over onto the bedrock that was there, where they tried to blend it in, and the edge was thin enough that I could shove my pickaxe underneath it and crack a piece off. But it didn't want to crack off very easy, and we didn't have any heavy equipment or anything to get through that cap. So again, we kind of knew that could be the spot, but we're going to have to come up here with some heavy duty tools to break through this plug. The thing had to be 4.5 feet across and probably 3 foot tall, as it stood off of the solid bedrock, and kind of contoured. It's just like a little hill there, and they contoured it in nice. I mean, and almost, if you didn't know any better and didn't know there was a hole there before, you wouldn't really know. You'd probably walk right by it. So we're figuring, okay, that's the spot, and we're going to have to come back with tools and do whatever. So that night we go back to camp, and same thing, we get all set up and have some dinner and have some coffee and tea, and just shooting the shit around the fire. And the next thing you know, here comes that fizzy orange ball from behind us. Came from our overhead and comes flying over our head at a pretty decent altitude, probably, 800, 900, 1,000 feet over our head, and we're sitting at 6,800 feet in elevation as it was. And this thing comes flying right by us. It don't make no noise or nothing, but we see it. We see the fizziness, and the next thing you know, this thing goes straight out and then banks a hard, literally a 90-degree turn and goes south. And it starts going south, and then 2 seconds later, you start hearing the afterburners of a jet. And as we turn around and look, I'm not a big jet pilot fighter guy, but I would say accordingly that 2 F-15 fighter pilots and planes came in and started chasing this thing all over the place. And for 45 minutes, they put on a show. I mean, that thing ran circles around them. He would do 90-degree turns. It would come flying over our head and then do a 90 degrees straight up in the air. And the jet can't do that. So the jet's afterburner would kick in, and the guy would do a tail slide. He'd basically be going forward and then try to go straight up, and his butt end of the plane would slide out past him. So he was almost upside down trying to get up to the elevation to catch up to this thing. And we're watching this in just like total awe. Like, holy crap, we were getting like the show of a lifetime. What a treasure in itself, huh? So this goes on for at least 45 minutes. And finally, the fizzy ball starts dropping these little white things out the back of it. And I don't know what they are, like little white, small fizzy balls were dropping out the back, and the jets didn't know what to make of it either, so they broke off away from whatever they were. And it wasn't like they were flares, they were more like little orbs, because they took off on their own. All of them started to gather up behind the mother, and then they all took off to the south, and the jets took off to the... Holy smokes, did we actually witness that? So you go for one thing and you think you're going to get some treasure, or maybe you're going to find... We got the show of a lifetime, something I'll never ever forget. And then later on, as we went back to this location to work on it, we figured out there was a reason why they actually showed up that night. And I'll fill you that, I'll fill that part of the story in on a later date. But I hope you enjoyed the story for today. And, Little Lost Mountain is certainly a pretty incredible place. And every time I've gone back there, there's always been some kind of strangeness, high strangeness that goes on there. So it's a really interesting place, and definitely worth going back if just for that. Not only the treasure that's there, but just for that. And we'll get into why the treasure's still there at a later day. You guys have a good night. Thanks.